Welcome everyone to our first pep talk. We are hoping to do these on a quarterly basis. So my name is Savannah Pierce-Walker. I'm the Prevention Education Specialist at School District U46. So happy everyone could come out and brave the weather. Just a few housekeeping things. Make sure we have everyone sign in. We're not gonna spam you with emails. We're just gonna be letting you know when the next one of these is gonna happen. And on the same table, we have some parent handbooks that we've provided for you by Operation Parent. They are a wonderful company that we love to work with. And there's the Vaping Parent Handbook that was written by U46 and provided. And so that's more relevant to the information that we have tonight. And so tonight's pet talk is about vaping. And providing translation is Ricardo Gasca. We're super appreciative of him from Ecker Center, so he's able to provide the translation in the headphones. So we're gonna play a little game to start. It's called Spot the Vapes. So there are multiple vapes on the screen right now. If you could take a look and you can just shout out if you notice one that you think is a vape.
B.
B.
A.
A.
I.
F. F.
Yeah, probably.
It's not all.
J.
It is not all of them. This isn't a trick.
Maybe not D. I was like, I'm gonna start with E, D.
Yeah.
Maybe not D.
Not E, not H.
Wouldn't it be mean if it was all of them?
Not E.
Okay. So here's the correct answers. If you got all of them correctly, raise your hand for me. Good, let's go. If you got like 3 or 4 correctly, raise your hand. 3 or 4. If you had 3 or less, raise your hand. Good, it's okay, we're here to learn, let's go. So I like to do this because it's important to see how easily these things blend in with everyday items. So even our champion that got all of them correctly probably took you a couple of times to actually look through them and identify which ones were vapes. And so I don't do this to scare you and just uncovering every USB drive your kid has, but it is important to note that they can easily blend in. And so these 3 facts on the screen is why I feel so passionate about vaping. First is that every single hour the tobacco industry spends $1 million on advertising. So while we're in this room, $1 million is getting spent. Next is 9 out of 10 adults with an addiction started when they were teenagers. And lastly, only 12% of teenagers who try to quit vaping are actually successful on their first try. So this paints a pretty clear picture that we have something that is being constantly put in front of everyone's faces. It creates a lifelong addiction, and it is very difficult to quit. And so if we're able to disrupt the cycle of the tobacco industry, then we can really change people's lives. So we'll talk about this in 3 simple questions of just what is vaping, why is it harmful, and what can we actually do to help disrupt the cycle from the tobacco industry. So just a little clarification, the term vape and e-cigarette are synonymous, they are the same thing. I typically use the term vape because whenever I'm working with kids, that's the term they prefer, but the proper term is e-cigarette. But there's 3 types of e-cigarettes to keep in mind. The first one is nicotine. Those range about 3 to 5% nicotine. However, we are seeing some companies come out with stronger ones, which is a concern in itself. One disposable vape, especially the higher capacity ones, can equal multiple packs of cigarettes in terms of the amount of nicotine that gets into the body. The next is cannabis. We're not going to go into this a whole lot. This could be a pep talk in itself. But there are cannabis vapes that mostly come in cartridges, so they go into a bigger unit, and the cartridge is disposed of, and a new cartridge is purchased. The disposable cannabis vapes are generally Delta 8 THC, which is a semi-synthetic form of cannabis that is not regulated by the FDA. Lastly is nicotine-free vapes. These are very similar to the nicotine ones, just without the nicotine. The concern with these is that many of them still have alarming amounts of nicotine in them. There was a study done where many of these were taken off the shelves, tested, and they had really high amounts of nicotine in them. And so they're not always truthful when they say nicotine free. Additionally, some of them promise herbal components, so you can vape your caffeine or vape to help you sleep at night or something like that. But these herbal components aren't proven to work when breathed, and they're very harmful to the lungs. So it's kind of easy to remember, the lungs need air, and that's it. And so when in doubt, just breathe air. So this started back in 2007. I like to give a little history lesson because this shows how we got to this point and why some of the common misconceptions about vaping exist. So it started in 2007 when e-cigarettes first entered the market as a cessation tool. They were made to look like a cigarette, feel like a cigarette, only they delivered a lower nicotine content so that someone could hopefully switch to an e-cigarette and then wean themselves off and stop using completely. These products were not the most reliable. They were a little glitchy, and so they gave such a low nicotine hit that a lot of people didn't like them and would switch back to cigarettes. And so the market evolved to answer that need from consumers, and we got the pen. And so the pen introduced a refillable tank and a rechargeable battery, and this is where we started seeing flavors come onto the market. And so flavors were banned from cigarettes a long time ago because it was pretty widely recognized that flavors equaled underage use. And so vaping doesn't have that same restriction. And so that's where we started seeing these smoke shops pop up with, you could have all kinds of flavors between, banana, mango, and even one called unicorn milk, which was a fun one to discover. Don't even know what that's supposed to taste like. But it appealed to young people. But then in 2011 came the mod. So this was the answer to the fact that these still use free-base nicotine and provided a low nicotine hit. And so the mod was able to be modified, so to speak, on how much output was given by the device. And so these were the ones that were super boxy, they had big clouds, and you could take a bigger nicotine hit that way. However, they were very high maintenance. You always had to replace your coil, you always had to replace parts of it that were breaking all the time, and they were very expensive to buy, let alone maintain. And so when Juul came to the market in 2019, this really changed the game because no more was this big boxy device that you had to maintain. Instead, you had something very small, very sleek. The only thing you had to do to maintain it was to charge it. And whenever you were done with your pod, you threw it away and you put a new one in. These were the ones that were being mistaken as USB devices because it was made to look like one. And then in 2022, closed pod systems were banned from being sold by the FDA, and that's where we come to the disposables. And so because of the language of that ban, the disposable was able to be sold because of it wasn't a closed pod system. Instead, you get to throw away the whole device. And so this is where we're starting to see high capacities come. They're measured in puffs, so usually when they first entered the market, it was like 2,000 puffs. Now the minimum is one of the minimums is like 5,000 puffs, 8,000 puffs. And so they're getting bigger and bigger and cheaper to manufacture. And so nicotine salts were introduced by Juul, and this really changed the industry and brought it a new standard. And so the product of adding a nicotine molecule to salt results in nicotine salts, and you can see how they compare. The yellow is the Juul patented formula, which is nicotine with benzoic acid, and then below that is a traditional pack of Pall Mall cigarettes. And then down here you can see the early e-cigarettes, so you can probably see why they weren't very successful. But it's important to keep in mind, when the nicotine level is that high, you feel those withdrawals quicker. So then you pair that with the fact that you have a device that you can hit anywhere, anytime. It's not as foul smelling. You don't have to go out to the curb and disrupt your entire day to do it. It's very easy to hide. And so you are constantly taking hits as soon as you feel those withdrawals. So some people are even more addicted to nicotine if they switch to vaping instead of less. Another problematic thing with the vaping industry is that we're starting to see some of these old ads recirculate. Just like with flavors, the advertising space was very restricted on how cigarettes can advertise their products. And so whenever vaping came on the market, they weren't confined to those same restrictions. And so you start to see some of these ads start to recirculate. So you can see some of these similarities with the cigarette on the left and the vaping ad on the right, except for my Juul one over here that switched. But you can see some of the similarities of how they just recycled these, added a vape, and called it a day. Because we know advertising works. Even if it doesn't prompt you to get up and go buy your first vape right now, what it does is changes your association with it over time. So over time, you start thinking this positive, lovely yellow picture with a hip, pretty person holding the vape, and you don't think about the cancers or the harm that you're doing to your body in the meantime. And so next time you're out and about, see if you can recognize the 4 Ps of advertising. The first is your product, where you have your fun colors, you have your tasty flavors, you have the promotion to make it look cool, make it look like it's everywhere. Everyone is doing it, so if you pick it up, it's no big deal. You have your price, which is a lot of introductory coupons, or even your first vape is free. And lastly, you have your placement, which is get it in the hands of people of influence. And the most influential place that they can put the vape is in the hands of teenagers, because they're sharing them and they're able to see like, oh, my friend's doing it and they're fine, so I can vape too, right? And so that's how the cycle of advertising starts as well. So, let me take a drink, sorry. I gotta prepare because I love to talk about dopamine. So dopamine is in your brain, and this is one of the biggest ways that nicotine can affect your brain over time. So dopamine is responsible for pleasure, motivation, attention, sleep, mood. I like to describe it as a reinforcement hormone in your brain because it fluctuates throughout the day. So if you do something good, if you eat a nutritious meal, if you have a positive interaction with a friend or something like that, then your dopamine is gonna rise. And that's your body's way of saying, this is good, let's keep doing it. However, given this presentation right now, if I fall flat on my face and I hurt myself, my dopamine's probably gonna dip down. And that's because that's not good socially, because that's embarrassing, but also it's not good physically, because I just hurt myself. And so next time I give a presentation, I'm probably gonna be a little unsure of how to walk and like Bambi all over again. Because I'm gonna remember that wasn't good, that wasn't fun, I don't wanna do that again. And that's because of the reinforcement of dopamine. And so this first picture right here, you see a normal neuron that kind of represents maybe your average dopamine, along with your average dopamine receptors. What happens when you take a hit of nicotine is your brain is flooded with with dopamine from nicotine. So this is more than you naturally produce on your own. So not only do you feel good, you feel really good. And then over time, your brain is very smart and it wants to regulate this because it knows it's not normal. And so over time, it's going to downsize how much dopamine you're making and how many receptors you have. And so this doesn't feel good. That is where anxiety lives. That's where depression lives. That's where a condition called anhedonia, which is a lack of pleasure, that's where that comes from, because you have such low dopamine. So what you do is you take another hit. You're chasing this, but you're never gonna feel that middle picture again because your tolerance is increased by this time, and you're starting from a lower baseline. And so you can see where the cycle addiction starts with nicotine, is you feel this low dopamine and you take another hit. And you're gonna feel the low dopamine, you're gonna take another hit. And that's what's happening, especially in the brains of teenagers who are still developing in their brain. There's a lot of effects on the body as well. And this is concerning because this is just what we know so far. There's still studies being done on this, so imagine what we're gonna know in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. The experiment is happening right now and is happening with teenagers. And so that's one of the messages I try to make sure I convey to teenagers is don't be their experiment, because they're just making money off of the fact that teenagers can get very easily addicted, and as we learned from earlier, they're addicted for life. Just to give a little preview on cannabis vaping, we're not going to talk a whole lot about it because that could be its own pep talk. But cannabis vaping is still very prevalent, especially since Illinois is a legalized state. And if you're over the age of 21, I'm not here to tell you to quit using cannabis in any form or fashion, But if you are under the age of 21, you are much more likely to get cannabis use disorder, which is an addiction to cannabis. And that was commonly thought of as non-addictive, but cannabis is very addictive. And so people who use before the age of 18 are 4 to 7 times more likely to develop cannabis use disorder. And so cannabis has been linked to depression, anxiety, psychosis, which is where you hallucinate, and it's a symptom of schizophrenia and other concerning mental health disorders. And when it's used when the brain is still developing, it can be linked to problems with long-term memory, with attention, problem solving, learning, coordination, and those can affect you for your entire life. And so there is a reason that the age of use is 21. It's because your brain is more developed and you are much less likely to get addicted. And concerning as well is the fact that we have more strength and more high potency products than ever before. And so the average cannabis product is 10 times more potent than it was in the 70s. So this isn't mom and dad's cannabis, this isn't your grandparents' cannabis, this is concerning high potency, and those are the ones that are most associated with long-term issues. And so what do these actually look like? So the picture on the left here, this is the ELF bar, which no, it doesn't say ELF bar anymore, it says BC 5000 because of a patent issue at the courts. But it's still the same shape, and there are colors that usually coordinate with the flavors. And so we don't have one in the plastic, I was about to say in the flesh, but that's a general shape that a lot of them are taking now, especially the high capacity ones. There's still some small ones, and those look very similar to what you think your Juul looks like. But then you have these tiny little guys, and these are the tiny versions of them that are easy to hide. They're probably not as common as, say, these, but they're still pretty common. And even as I'm holding this, I just gotta point out that this smells phenomenal. And that's as someone that knows the harm of these things, so you can imagine how appealing this can be whenever you're just smelling it throughout the day. Over here we have some cannabis cartridges, and so the one center right is the one that you probably see from a dispensary, and that goes into a bigger device and the whole cartridge is thrown away, and then you have Delta 8 on the end, that's a disposable. And so the ways that you can tell these two apart is first, especially in the disposable devices. In the older vapes, you're gonna be able to see the liquid, excuse me. But in these disposable devices, you're not gonna see the liquid, and that's because it uses a mesh coil, so it looks like a piece of foam that's been soaked in the e-juice. But in the cannabis vapes, you're gonna see it because it uses that same system. Another thing is the smell. There's not an amount of sweetness in the world that covers up the smell of cannabis. However, the nicotine vapes smell like their flavor. So if it's mango flavor, you're gonna smell mango. You're gonna smell unicorn milk, apparently. And whatever that's supposed to smell like. There's also some stealth devices, and I like to talk about these because I don't want these to scare people. Because these typically circulate on Facebook or social media, and they look very convincing. And so then you have parents that are like, how am I supposed to tell these apart from actual things? And I like to talk about these because they are, every one of them has a flaw. And so this is the same thing as the vaporware hoodie right there. And so how this works is your vape gets hooked up right here. It gets put into this little pocket that sits on the chest bone. And then you have your other, where did it go? You have your mouthpiece. And so while this looks very convincing in photos, this is clearly not your average, ordinary pull tie. What do they call it? So cinches, whatever they're supposed to be called. And so that's where you can kind of keep in mind. And plus the branding on the inside, this is blank on the outside, but on the inside it says vaporware. And so that's pretty telling. And so at the end, while you guys leave, we're gonna have these on the table in the back if you wanna get a closer look at them, by the way. There's also some very creative hiding places. The oblong Sharpie, we've seen those with the Juuls. However, this isn't water. This is a stash device where you can put things in the middle of it. And these are sold online. So if you have random Etsy purchases that you're noticing that your teenager is getting or something like that, you don't require an ID for things like this because it's handmade on Etsy.
You can get them on Amazon.
Yeah, they're on Amazon as well. I like to talk about this guy, because this is how you can vape without any cloud going into the air. So all you do is take a puff, you breathe it into this, and it kind of makes the cloud almost non-existent. And so these are also found on Amazon, on Etsy, and things like that. And I'm oddly proud of this possession, because this is also a vape. And so, but just like everything else, there's a flaw in this. And so the first thing to know is that it doesn't actually close. In order to close it, you take the tip out, and then you can close it. But this doesn't stay on very well, and this is silicone. And so, who leaves a highlighter on their desk like this? You probably take a closer look. If it doesn't work, that's kind of your telltale sign. It used to say highlight on it, but this scratches off very easily, but that's the brand name is Highlight. They have received a warning letter by the FDA to stop selling these products, which is a cool win for us, but they're still out there. And so how it works is that you take the tip out, you can inhale it, you breathe it out, and you can probably put the tip back in or just use the lid. But if you take the lid off, you expose the charging port. So all of these have flaws. They're not perfect, so you can tell the difference. Perhaps the most concerning part about this is I got this for free online. So, yeah, this is a promotion. Don't go out and buy these. But all that happened was I found a code on Reddit, tried it just to see if it'll work, and sure enough, it showed up in a very discreet package at my doorstep. And so this is kind of what's happening with teenagers and vapes.
How frequently is the school district finding these?
The stealth devices?
Yes, yeah.
Not as much anymore because they have received warning letters from the FDA. A lot of shops went ahead and shut down like they should have. So these aren't as common anymore. For a while they were just kind of circulating scary. As far as how often, that's kind of hard to say for sure. The traditional devices are much more frequently found. So in terms of how do teens actually access vapes, the most common way is going to be your friends and family. So it's kind of understood that if one person in your friend group has a vape, everybody has a vape. Because they pass it around, they share it, they meet up in the bathroom so that they can pass it around and then get back to class, things like that. And then another way is social media. Snapchat in particular is pretty concerning because of the disappearing messages. But even more concerning about social media is oftentimes they're meeting strangers who supply these for them. And there's also some convenience stores and smoke shops. We would love to say that everyone IDs properly and that they turn away anyone that is not of age, but that is not the case. And so these stores typically get circulated pretty easily among friend groups. Online as well, just like I said, I got the Highlight Vape online. These are becoming less common as well, but they still exist. The ones that do ID properly don't always catch underage IDs, and so some people just upload a random ID and it doesn't matter if it's 21 or not, or they take their parents' ID. Creative sources is always a fun one to talk about because kids are creative, and as much as we want to stay one step ahead of them, that's not always going to happen. And so one story I heard is a kid using DoorDash to get their vape. And so DoorDash does not sell tobacco devices. I checked. What does happen is a kid might order, say, Dunkin' Donuts. That Dunkin' Donuts is next to a 7-Eleven. And so then they message their dashers like, hey, there's a $40 cash tip if you bring me this vape. And so that's how they get around some of these rules. So some conversational foundations. So a little bit about my background is I have a background in clinical mental health counseling. I'm finishing my master's degree right now. And in case you were wondering, it's hard. And so one of the ways that we talk to people who are experiencing addiction, especially if it's an active addiction, it doesn't matter if it's alcohol, cannabis, nicotine, or anything in between. Not that alcohol is the hardest thing. I don't know why that was the one I thought of, but we use what's called motivational interviewing. And so I don't expect every parent in here to go home and be the perfect counselor for their kid, because you're a parent and you have a very unique position for your teenager. However, some of the conversational foundations can be really helpful to foster ongoing conversations with your teenager so that you can get more than just a one-worded answer. Do you vape? No. Well, that's not very useful, is it? But instead, if you express empathy and acceptance, you're telling them that you accept them as human and you see where they're at, and it doesn't mean that you condone their behavior. Instead, what happens is you're able to foster a conversation to where they don't feel like they have to hide from you. Don't force change. So if you can initiate the change talk by identifying discrepancies between their goals and their actual behavior. If their goal is to make the football team, but they haven't run a day in their lives and they're vaping every day, there's a discrepancy there. They're not going to get to point B from point A. And so that's how you can start to have those conversations with them. If they want to get to college, vaping is not going to help them get there. Next is find motivation, enhance it. Motivation is there. It is there, we just got to find it. And so once we're able to find it, you can make their goal feel attainable. Well, if you do run every day, even if it's just for a little bit, you're going to get in better shape, and then yeah, you're probably going to make the football team if you practice. Things like that. And then identify any obstacles in their way. Lastly, is explore outcomes. If you sit there and say, well, you're going to die from vaping, they're probably not going to listen to you. Two, that's what we call a scare tactic, which hasn't worked in the past. Instead, if you just ask them, if you continue to vape, what's the best thing that's going to happen? Best case scenario, they may feel accepted by their friends temporarily. What's the worst thing that could happen? Waking in a volley, which is an e-cigarette vaping associated lung injury. It's like pneumonia and it can be deadly. So there's a big lopsided risk there that you can help them identify so that they can make a better decision. Another way to talk to kids is through harm reduction. And so this is a very realistic approach. It doesn't mean that it's okay to vape, but it means that you understand that they do, and while in the meantime, you can take measures to help reduce the harms of vaping. One of those is by avoiding dangerous situations, like meeting a stranger off Snapchat. That's a dangerous situation. Another one is avoiding black market vapes, because you never know when they've been tampered with and what has been put into them. Monitoring their use. If you know they vape and suddenly they're vaping more and more and more and more, and then they're becoming antisocial, you know maybe it's time to kind of ramp up your intervention efforts. Lastly, encourage communication. If they're talking to you, you're doing good. If they're not talking to you, then that doesn't mean you're doing badly, but it means that maybe there's some other approaches that you can try. And so some common misconceptions that I like to pun intended, clear the air about. The first is commonly believed to relieve stress. Like we saw on the dopamine slide, it actually increases your stress over time and decreases your stress tolerance. The only difference is you think that using the vape changes that, and so you become dependent on it to feel less stressed. It helps people quit smoking. However, it's been more responsible for getting people to start using nicotine than it has ever been to get people to stop using nicotine. And so there's an important discrepancy there. There are some anecdotal testimonies that it has been helpful, and those are fantastic and they're great and we love it. But it's been more responsible for getting people to start. Lastly, it's just water vapor, and Nicole's got a wonderful illustration to this. So the water vapor is in the room right now, and so that's water vapor.
That's water.
However, what is actually in the vape is an aerosol containing around 2,000 chemicals, and so that's similar to hairspray. And so the hairspray has a bunch of chemicals that are sprayed for a very specific purpose. And so that's the difference between a water vapor and an aerosol. And so what vaping is an aerosol that contains around 2,000 chemicals. And so speaking of
My
Nicole,
arm is very sticky.
yeah, now our arm's gonna be sticky. I'm gonna turn it over to Nicole for the rest of the presentation.
All right, thank you.
My name is Nicole Wheatley, and I am the Drug-Free Communities Coordinator for the Coalition for a Safe and Healthy Elgin. It's a long name, but we say CSHE for short. So I basically work with students, and I work with teachers, I work with healthcare professionals, the police department, business owners, and parents like you, youth, anybody that's interested in seeing our kids in Elgin be safe and healthy and free from substance misuse. So we do try to do that through education like this, talking to parents. We go into the schools and talk to students. And we also try to provide alternative activities so that students can get a natural high, do something that's fun, do something that it makes you excited and get that natural dopamine release without having all the negative things. So we have like a drug-free dash in April of every year, and we do a 5K run. We have a 2-mile walk. We try to get students outside in nature and moving their bodies so that you get that natural dopamine. We have some dances we've done in the past with middle school students, and we want to try to work more with our teens and try to get some more fun activities so that we can say, let's have fun, get natural dopamine, and not use substances. So that's what my role is as a project coordinator. I'm going to talk to you about why teens vape very briefly and what makes it most dangerous for them. This is one of those answers that is different for every teen, but sort of the number one thing that teens will say is because they're bored. So they, you're looking for that high. We're looking for some really exciting experience. And so they look at vaping as a way to get that high, to get that kind of exciting experience. Some of the other ones are things like they're just curious. Of course, they see their friends or they see things on social media, and it looks like they want to know what it's all about. Sometimes it's just that the fruity flavors smell good, and just like Savannah said, you smell some of those, and they make you want to try it, especially if you have a sweet tooth. Some of the others are because the teens say they are tired, they want to relax, but they can't fall asleep. So they've heard, probably from their friends, sometimes from parents who mean well, but they don't understand the effects on the brain, and they say, you could use this vape, it'll help you to sleep. But it actually causes a disruption of sleep cycles. As well as sometimes teens are dealing with depression and anxiety, and they think it's going to help, and they're self-medicating basically, rather than seeing a professional about it. So these are just some common reasons when we ask teens why they use. And I'm gonna give you a little anecdotal evidence here from one of my own kids. So I am previously a biology teacher before I started working at the coalition 2 years ago. I also am a parent, and I feel like I'm still learning, so I'm right along with you. I'm not an expert in any of these things, and I'm constantly learning because this field is constantly changing. And I have 3 kids. My youngest there is my daughter, who is 14, just about to become 15. My middle son up at the top, he is 16 now. And my oldest son is in the middle here with a puppy, and he is 19. My husband and I are pretty involved parents. We like to do a lot with them. We love taking our kids to all kinds of things and doing stuff with them. We talk to them about drug use, about our expectations, what we say we accept, the things that we say you're allowed to do and not allowed to do in my house. My husband is a pastor of a local church here in Elgin, so we've talked to them about the Bible, what we think about, what does God think about that, and their bodies and how they're made. I'm a biology teacher. I talk about the body and what's healthy for the body and not. But despite all that, our kids are gonna grow up, and they gotta make these decisions for themselves. And my oldest son there in the middle went as a freshman last year to Illinois State University. He's a sophomore now this year. And he told us in the spring of this year that he had actually started getting high with friends towards the early part of his freshman year. And so he came to us to tell us this, and we were slightly shocked, but maybe not totally so, because he said there was 2 reasons why. Number one, he wanted to fit in. He said since, he never told us this before, but he said when he was little, from about 2nd grade on, we had moved to a new state, and he wanted to feel like he fit in with his friends, and he was gonna do pretty much anything. He plays sports like they do, he plays these games like they do, because he wanted to fit in. And going to college was no different. Even at 18 years old, he still wants to fit in. And secondly, he was starting to think of those big questions in life. What am I gonna be? What do I wanna become? Who am I really? My parents have taught me all these things all these years. Now how do I wanna live? And so he had those big questions. He wanted to fit in. He's tried getting high with his friends, and he realized, this kind of feels good. Maybe the next day not so much, But I know that if I vape and if I use marijuana, it's gonna feel good in the moment. And then I don't think about all those big questions that I have. And so he wasn't dealing with getting the answers to those hard questions. He's just covering it with that Band-Aid of making your brain feel better. And he quickly realized, it took a couple months, and he made a realization. This wasn't the direction he wanted to go, thank the Lord. And he stopped using anything, and I'm praying that that's still the case today. But just to say, like, we as parents can do all the right things. We can check all the boxes. We've done all the right things. Our kids need to make these decisions for themselves. The best we can do is try to give them all the tools they can to make wise decisions. And then we as parents give them back to the Lord. And then we continue to have our conversations with them and be that open person that they can come talk to. And I'm thankful that he did. I wanted to give you a little information besides just those whys of like why teens vape, what is actually going on in their brains. Savannah started to talk to you about dopamine, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Because of the biology side of me, this is the part I like. So sorry if I geek out here for a minute with you. There are two main parts of the brain that we're concerned about with adolescents. The first part is the middle part of the brain called the limbic. Oh, sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. This one. Aha. The limbic system right there in the center, middle of the brain. This is known as the pleasure center of the brain. So when Savannah talked about dopamine being released, how that makes you feel good, makes you feel like you've done something good for your survival, that's the part of the brain that's feeling that dopamine. It's the feeling part of the brain. It's not a thinking part of the brain. All it feels is, that feels really good. Let me go do that again. If it's good for your survival, that's good. If it's for food, it's for hanging out with your friends, it's for reading that book that you really like, or watching those movies, playing those games. Those are great reasons that you get dopamine released. Your brain, though, that limbic system doesn't know the difference between dopamine released because you ate versus dopamine released because you just took a hit of nicotine or marijuana or something worse. You get a far higher percentage of dopamine released when you do nicotine and methamphetamine, something that's not a real substance that you do every day. And so over time, it kind of hijacks how the brain responds to pleasure. The other part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. This is right behind the forehead. And this part of the brain is your logic, the thinking part of the brain. It's the part that thinks before you act. So while we call the limbic system the accelerator, it's the gas pedal in the car. When something feels good, you hit the gas and go for it. I want to do it again. When the prefrontal cortex comes in, it puts the brake on. It says, wait a minute, is that really going to be good for my survival? Is this really something good for me? And it makes you stop and think a minute and think through if this is something that's going to be good for your future. I want you to tell me, this part of the brain, when do you think, at what age is that part fully developed and fully on board? Anybody just yell out a number, what age do you think it's fully developed?
20.
What did you say? Okay, 25, 26, I'm talking about pleasure center of the brain. You think in 20s? Go lower.
5 years old.
Higher than that. They do act at 5 like they know everything. Close, you're closer. It's at 12. By 12 years old, that pleasure center is fully developed. All the parts are there that need to be there. Okay, so your 12-year-old knows what feels good. That makes sense. They need to know what's good for survival. I know that when I'm hungry, I need to eat and get that dopamine released to make me healthy. Guess when the prefrontal cortex is fully developed? Now you can go back to the 20s, right? About 25 years old when that is fully developed. So does it make sense why adolescents do risky things that seem kind of dumb? They know what feels good, but they don't know how to put the brake on fully to say, wait a minute, this might not be good for my future. So this is why they're good at taking risks, which is good for some things about being an adolescent, not good for other things. So that's just a little bit behind how that actually is working in adolescence. So parents, as you understand what your teenager's brain is going through, and you understand how this all is functioning at that age, why it's not a good idea to start using substances at that young age when that part of the prefrontal cortex is not done being developed yet. We want you to start being a little bit of a detective in your home. So like Savannah says, you don't need to go to every USB that they have and every sweatshirt and be checking it out. I'm not gonna look at every time my kid sneezes, coughs, says that they don't feel good, and think they're using drugs. What I do want you to do is to say, if I'm seeing a lot of these symptoms, I'm gonna start asking some more questions. So some of them we see are behavior changes. So you notice like they're very moody and they're getting angry much more easily. They are having difficulty concentrating at school. Maybe their grades are slipping, so you should be checking on grades on a regular basis. They're using new slang terms or emojis in their texts. And yes, you should be nosy as parents. Ask to see their phones. You have a right to do so. Check those text threads. Look at their social media. Lily, what was some of those weird slang terms that are being drug use?
Well, like Savannah said, these can change literally with next week, but I've heard pen, penny, Benjamin.
And what do those mean?
It's referring to your, device.
Your vape device?
Yeah, and then also zeroing out is another term.
Zeroing out. What does that mean? That you're like,
You hold it all in and you don't let any smoke out. So
oh, that's lovely. See,
extra.
I'm learning something even now with you. So yes, if you start to see some new, and like she said, they are constantly changing, especially amongst middle schoolers, they love it. Changes in eating patterns, again, if taking nicotine is gonna give you this much dopamine, but eating dinner gives you this much dopamine, guess which one your brain wants to do? So teens start to lose weight, and they're not eating as well or as often. Mouth sores, dry mouth, nosebleeds, all because you're breathing in that aerosol and it dries everything out. Sudden interest in candles, perfumes, and cologne. And this is, again, teenagers become interested in these things, and that's totally fine. It's that if it comes with all the rest, then you start to ask some questions. Become a detective. All right, so before then you go have this talk with your teen, whether you're gonna talk prevention or you're starting to have some questions and you're a little bit concerned, what should you do first? Number one, put yourself in their shoes. When my son came to me and he said, guess what, this is what I was doing, Mom. I first of all had to remember that I used to be a teenager myself, and I went to college, and I also wanted to fit in. And I tried going to the parties, and I tried to see what was alcohol about. I never was actually interested in smoking or anything, but alcohol, I was like, yeah, maybe I'll try this out, until someone spilled vodka on me at a party, and then I said, yeah, that's enough. I don't want to do that anymore. So I know what it felt like. I'm not gonna get mad at him, because we've all been there as well. Also, know the facts. You don't have to be a biologist like me, and like I said, I'm still learning, but get to know some of these things. The handbooks that we have given you tonight, and the materials that you have in those bags, read through them. Just take some time in the next couple months, read a little bit, and familiarize yourself so that you can talk like you know what you are talking about, but it's okay if you don't know everything. Let your teen research it with you if you don't know the answer. It's always good for them. Stay calm and pick a time and a place where they're ready to have a conversation. Not when they're hungry, not when they're stressed about a big exam, but take them out for a fun thing that they like to do. Go for a walk, get out there. It happens to make you want to talk some more, and do something they like, and then have a conversation. And then while you're talking with them, try to remember these things. I hate these clickers. Blame the tobacco companies. Like Savannah said, that they're the ones that are marketing your teens. They would like to get the next generation of clients. So that it doesn't matter if they're gonna die at 50, they still will have them from 15 to 50. Avoid scare tactics though. Just like Savannah said, there's a good probability they're not gonna die. There's a good probability they're not gonna end up, totally addicted, is a possibility. Also the other side, so you wanna give them facts, but we don't need to overinflate and make it seem worse than it is, because teens are very good at seeing when you're BSing them, right? Don't assume the worst, and also ask for their perspective. Teenagers love to share with you their opinion and what they know about. So give them a chance to talk to you about it. All right, after you talk with them, try to remember this, to follow up. Have more conversations all the time. It doesn't need to be one long lecture, but just keep talking to them about it. See how they're doing, keep checking in with them. Help your student to manage stress and pressure. If they are having some mental health issues, seek out help. We've given you some resources in here, and we're gonna show you a slide in just a few more minutes for more resources. They can talk to school counselors, they can talk to mental health providers, anything that we can to give your teens the tools they need in order to kind of get through this process here without using drugs. You can have, once they know that they can trust you, obviously they're gonna open up. One of the things I found some research that said that families that eat together, as often as possible, they have a 4 times less likely chance that the teens are gonna use nicotine or start smoking. They are 2.5 times less likely to use marijuana, and they are half as likely to start using alcohol before they're 21. So if you want one good protective measure is just eat meals together as often as you can. It doesn't have to be all the time. I know it's hard and we're busy, but as often as you can, sit down together, turn off the cell phones, turn off the TV, have conversations with each other, ask open-ended questions. What did you do today? What was the best thing about your day? What was the worst thing about your day? Just let them talk and don't ask just yes or no, because obviously if you say, how was your day? It's gonna be, it was fine. Check in frequently, those 61-minute conversations, they could just be in the car on the way. You know, oh hey, I was just at this talk the other day about vaping. What's going on in your school? Do you feel the pressure? You know, just asking them. And it could just be for those couple of minutes, taking them to school, taking them home, taking them to practice. Make sure your expectations are clear. My kids knew what it is that I wanted them to do and not do. Obviously, they have to then make that decision. I didn't do this with my kids as much, but my only refusal skill I've taught my kids so far is you can blame me. If your friends tell you, here, you want to smoke this or you want this vape or whatever, I said, you can blame them. Tell them I will kill you if you do it. This is what my parents told me. And I had a very scary Sicilian mother. So, but you can teach them refusal skills. One sentence. Ask them what are their goals? Or do they have a big game coming up? Do they have a test? Do they want to keep their brain fresh because they have a big event coming up? Let them use that as their excuse. No, I can't, I'm not gonna use that because I have this thing coming up. I've got a big soccer game and I wanna be my best for my team. Let them come up with it and practice it with you. Just ask them to practice it a couple times. And then when they're in that situation, they're not gonna freeze and not know what to do. They're gonna say, blah, 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 blah. I don't wanna vape because I've got a big soccer team or a soccer game coming up. So they've already practiced it, they know what to do. And then if you tell them what the expectations are, have a consequence if they don't follow through, and then actually give the consequence. So don't pretend unless you're gonna do it. And that is the end of mine. So Lily's gonna come talk to you from King County Health Department. Top one is the advance.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Lily Peterson from the King County Health Department. We'll keep this nice and brief because I know we're about at the time. So first, I would love it if you all would take our survey of the pep talk. I'll advance to the next slide. Awesome. I would really recommend taking a picture of this slide as well. These are some local and online resources. The Tall Cop Says Stop is one of my favorite. That's a podcast. But yeah, and now we're gonna get into, sorry, I forgot about this. Now we're gonna get into naloxone, which is Narcan. Narcan is opioid overdose reversal. So this happens when opioids overwhelm receptors in the brain and respiration is repressed and the person may stop breathing. So an opioid is a synthetic or naturally occurring substance that alters the brain. It can be illegal or provided by a healthcare provider. And this includes like fentanyl, codeine, morphine, oxycodone, heroin. So yeah, overdose usually occurs over 1 to 3 hours, but with fentanyl, this is almost immediately. And then these are caused by taking more opioids than prescribed, combining opioids with other depressants such as alcohol. So Narcan won't reverse the effects of alcohol, but if you are in a situation where someone takes both, then it will overcome the opioid. So you're only dealing with the alcohol issue. Combining opioids with other depressants such as alcohol and taking more opioids than one can tolerate. So it's important to be able to distinguish between an overdose and someone who's just really, really high. With someone who's just really, really high, they're still gonna be responsive. Maybe not super responsive, maybe not super with you, but there's still gonna be something there. With an overdose, it's pale and clammy skin. And depending on the skin tone of the person, this can be truly any tone, like blue, purple, gray. So that's important to remember when you're looking. Breathing infrequent or stopped, deep snoring or gurgling. This is called like a death gurgle, and this is because the stuff is getting like stuck up here, and then they can't breathe. Unresponsive to any stimuli, we like to do the earlobe pinch and the sternum rub. And then slow or no heart rate or pulse, and then blue lips and or face. And like I said, blue can be purple, gray, a lot of different colors. So the steps are recognizing the overdose, attempting to arouse, calling 911, or administering the naloxone, and staying until help arrives. So why use naloxone, and why is it such a great tool for your first aid cabinet? It's effective, it reverses the effects of an overdose. Anyone in Illinois can be trained. There is no potential for addiction or misuse. It's as safe as water. It can be used on pregnant women and children, and it will not hurt someone who's not on opioids. It's very chemically similar to water if someone's not on opioids. Dogs and cats can also have it, but they need about 4 times the amount that humans do.
What's your Vicky there? No, I guess you'll have to do it from there, sorry.
Narcan nasal spray is an emergency treatment designed to rapidly reverse the effects of a life-threatening opioid emergency. If you suspect an opioid overdose, check to see if the person will not wake up, is very sleepy, or is not breathing well. Do not test the nasal spray device before use. Narcan nasal spray is for use in the nose only and is safe to use even if opioids are not present. Hold the nasal spray device with your thumb on the bottom of the plunger. Insert the nozzle into either nostril and press the plunger firmly to give the dose. One nasal spray device contains 1 dose of medicine. Call 911 immediately after getting Narcan nasal spray. If the person does not wake up, continue to give doses every 2 to 3 minutes until the person wakes up. It is safe to keep giving doses. Stay until an ambulance arrives, even if the person wakes up. You have the power to save a life. For more information, visit narcan.com.
So yeah, like I said, it's not harmful if you're not on opioids. Can you advance it, please? Thank you.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. If the person doesn't respond to the first dose, wait 2 to 3 minutes and give the second dose in the other nostril. And there's 2 in each box, and I have heard of up to like 23, Narcan. It really depends on the person's tolerance and a lot more, just like everyone's very unique. If they're still unresponsive, lay them in the recovery position away from you, wait for emergency responders. So the recovery position is on their side with their leg over like here, and then you turn them away from you because the person may be very combative or confused or honestly even hostile after they come back from an overdose. And it's important to remember that Narcan is not a substitute for calling 911. Okay, stay as long as you can or until help arrives. Like I said, if the person is responsive, they'll be confused and may not remember overdosing. You'll want to explain what happened. They may be experiencing withdrawal symptoms. They may become agitated or combative. We like to say discourage them from consuming more drugs and to comfort the person. Okay, I think that's all. Thank you so much. I love talking about this kind of stuff, so if anyone has questions, I'll be in the back, stay with them.
Thank you.
But again, thank you everyone for coming out, and we hope you have a wonderful evening.